And welcome everyone to our Thursday night digital discussion. Thanks so much for hanging out with us as we are getting Thursday going here. It was supposed to rain, so this was supposed to be planned out so it'd be raining during this, but alas, no rain. We hope that you're ready for a great talk tonight. We've got Bonnie Byrd, who you can see in the bottom there. Hi, Bonnie. How are you?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
Good. So she's going to talk to us about Waukesha Breweries. So we'll get into that in just a second. I just want to tell you what else is going on with the Historical Society and how you can get involved with not only our organization, but we're partnering tonight with our neighbors to the west, the Waukesha County Historical Society too. This has obviously been a really hard time for historical nonprofits. It's been a hard time for everybody. But historical nonprofits need your support now more than ever to be able to save your stories, to be able to do the work that we do in educating the public about the history of our various communities and whatnot too, and preserving all sorts of things like that too. So if you want to get involved, I'll post it up in the comments, but you can go to either the MCHS website or the Waukesha County Historical Society website. Either of us would, I'm sure, take whatever help you'd like to give during this hard time, especially if you're enjoying these conversations. Well, that's how you can support more conversations, right? So next week, we have another digital discussion going on with the Milwaukee County Historical Society. We have our lead archivist, Kevin Abing, giving a talk about the history of baseball in Milwaukee, because we miss baseball, right? So same time, 7:30 next Thursday night, we'll have Kevin doing the baseball talk.
Have you guys planned designated social distancing tailgating?
Oh, right. Yeah, I'll tailgate the history talk. I like that. Yeah. Just keep an eye out for that. But that is not what we're talking about tonight. We're talking about something else that's very exciting that maybe you're not missing so much, but we're missing all, getting together and enjoying, and that is beer. And so we hear a lot about Milwaukee breweries and the influence that Milwaukee has had on the world of beer. And Bonnie, I'm sure Milwaukee plays into this story a little bit, but we're going to take from Milwaukee's point of view.
It has a well-deserved reputation, a national reputation, international reputation as one of the homes of American brewing. But one of the things that actually drew me to beer research was the kind of historic evidence of smaller regional breweries, especially in the North and Midwest. And Waukesha's story certainly is indicative of that. So
yeah, well, I'm going to let you take it away. I'm just going to say before I hand the reins over to Bonnie that you can put your questions in the comments. All right, so do that. We'll get to them at the end. We'll have a little Q&A sesh with Bonnie. And with that being said, Bonnie, tell us about Waukesha beer.
All right. Well, first of all, I really appreciate Milwaukee having me this evening. It's a really nice way to end my day. But in addition to just kind of my general interest in small and regional breweries, I also wanted to acknowledge the fact that we used to be all one big happy county family here. This map is from the 1830s. It wasn't until 1846 that our two counties separated from each other. So there is a lot of early groundwork that creates strong ties between. And for Waukesha, Milwaukee is the first point of entry for so many folks who end up coming over and settling here. So a lot of strong relationships, and certainly beer being one of those things, ties that bind, as it were. I also would be remiss not to acknowledge at the beginning here, I'm focusing on Weber Brewery and Foxhead Brewery this evening, in part because they're two of the most well-remembered. I'm a transplant here, and when I first started asking about brewing traditions and brewing history, those were the two names that I heard the most often. That said, and you see them here on the screen, some of the others that existed in the 19th century and in some cases survived Prohibition. Frederickson Brewery in North Lake, Sussex, or the Boots Brewery up in Sussex-Lisbon area, Oconomowoc, the Benzel Brewery that was there along Fowler Lake, kind of right at that bridge. as well as a number of others within the city of Waukesha. I would say, kind of amongst all of them, the one that pops up with an odd amount of frequency is Bethesda Brewery. Their bottles, when folks are remodeling homes, especially out and around Lake Country, we'll get calls or emails into our research center saying, "Oh, I found some beer bottles around the foundation." And I say, "Oh, is it Bethesda?" And they go, "Oh, yeah. How'd you know?" I'm like, "Well, they're the brewery in Economowoc who's really serving that area." But also indicative of what really in terms of scale we're talking about. For Weber and Foxhead, yes, they are larger, but really they can be considered regional brewers. Now, we're not talking about craft brewers or microbrewers. Those are very much 20th century conceptions of size and scope. But they are regional. Sometimes they're called regional shippers, where you do see they have some market penetration, but they are not brewing at the capacities that we see the larger Milwaukee brewers doing, but they make a respectable go of it. Two, I wanted to pull back on the kind of larger map of brewing history because Weber and Foxhead both build on some existing infrastructure on the ground. And we're going to start then with somebody unrelated to either of them. Historians like to do this. We kind of bait and switch it sometimes. Starting with a gentleman named Henry Meyer. He comes to Waukesha in the 1850s with some land claims. This is a kind of crop off of a 1859 plat map of the city of Waukesha. And you can see where I've got a couple of arrows on there indicating property that Mr. Meyer owned. In particular, is North Street property. It's the one along the top of the map there. You can see H. Meyer kind of cut off by a rip in the map. What you don't get from this map, though, is the fact that that property is actually abutted up against a hill on the north side of town. And so, by all indications, Mr. Meyer from the earliest is constructing a brewing facility making lager beer because he's dug tunnels into the side of that hill that can help give him the climate that he needs in order to store and lager that beer. Now, Mr. Meyer's story is a bit short in terms of his brewing on North Street. By 1862, the property's at sheriff's auction. Which means it's primed for someone looking for an opportunity. Somebody like this gentleman, Stephen Weber. Now, Mr. Weber is a Bavarian or German immigrant. Classic Milwaukee story in many ways. He is married in spring of 1848. By that fall, he and his wife are immigrating and settling here in the United States. They come through New York City, but have a friend who's already here in Milwaukee, and so they connect with him fairly quickly and are settled in Milwaukee. We see Mr. Weber working as a porter, actually in one of the breweries in Milwaukee, and he and his friend actually end up investing in that business and calling it the West Hill Brewery. So he becomes a brewery owner. And we find him in the 1860 census listed as a brewer living in Milwaukee with his wife and their kids. But the relationship with the Milwaukee West Hill Brewery kind of falls apart. And so Mr. Weber leaves that, but retains the rights to the name. And as classically American stories go, he goes west. He just doesn't make it very far west. He makes it to Waukesha. And the former North Street Brewery that is at sheriff's auction in 1862, perfect timing for him. And so he buys it and he opens the West Hill Brewery. That image past the 1860s, but pretty indicative of what the facility would have looked like in its earliest decades. By all accounts, Mr. Weber does end up tearing down Meyer's original structure, all but the lagering caves. Those are left intact and expanded upon. But the Weber Brewery, and you can see in the announcement there to the side, he's making lager beer. He is immediately tapping into that German-inspired brew that really takes over the American palate in the late 19th century. One of my favorite details of that advertisement then is that he'll deliver his beer, his lager, to any part of the village without extra charge. So for his facility, he is not too far away actually from one of the railroad lines that comes through Waukesha. This map from a bird's eye view map from 1874. And so the railroad line is just along there. Hopefully you can see my mouse going along there. And the North Street facility, now we're looking south across town, so the North Street property is right about here. And those structures are all part of the Weber facility, or Mr. Weber's facility, the West Hill Brewery. He actually also ends up buying some of the property just across the street for an ice house and also for a kind of stables for his horse teams, for his teamsters. There's a private residence then here to the side that the family, some of the members of the family end up living in. But you can see in this bird's eye map then kind of that indication of the elevation. So that's the hillside those loggerang caves are getting dug into. Now, if you're familiar at all with Waukesha, and I know I was told this when I first moved here, full of one-way streets. Well, North Street, where the brewery was located, is one of those remaining one-way streets, but it's not that bad. But this is the view. This one coming from the 1880s, 1890s, but of the improvements being made to that brewing facility. So from that initial facade, from that first picture I had up, you can still see the outline there in the middle. You see that lovely smokestack. That's the chimney for his kilning, for kilning his malt. There is a rack house that is 3 stories tall for all of the beer he is brewing. And for Mr. Weber, it's a family affair. He gets his son involved in the brewing process, as well as his son-in-law. This lovely picture of some of the staff at the brewery. But if you look closely at the cases that they're standing around, and it's a little washed out in this photograph, it actually says Bethesda Brewery. Now, Stephen, as I said, is getting the family into the business. Particularly his son, William Weber, here. And William ends up at first getting into the business with his brother-in-law, John Land. Both of these pictures focusing on William, though. So they're on the left in the first picture, and then he and his wife, Julia, in their wedding picture. Now, the relationship with John Land, they remain in partnership for about 4 years, from 1884 until 1887. Actually, he's a photographer by trade. There are accounts that they don't really get along. It's not a great working relationship. So John kind of lets himself get bought out so that William can take over. But it is during their tenure that they renamed the company to the Bethesda Brewery. Now, for those of you who may have some knowledge of Waukesha's history during this period of time, or just Waukesha's reputation, even the title of this program tonight, Spring City Past. Waukesha was a city of mineral springs, of healing springs. And Bethesda was the first and kind of the leading health water company founded in the city of Waukesha. Now, there are some accounts that say that the Bethesda Brewery began brewing with Bethesda water. The paper trail for that is slim at best in terms of digging into archives and doing the research. And also there's kind of a question that comes up in terms of the capacity of each company. Bethesda Spring Company has its own shipping operation, has its own bottling operation, has its own facility, beautiful park, beautiful grounds. They're using a tremendous amount of water. To then accommodate a second business that is fundamentally in need of your number one product, water, doesn't make a lot of sense. So by all accounts, it's really William and John Land, so Weber and Land, trading on the reputation of Bethesda water. One of your most important ingredients of beer is water, so why not get the best water in the world to make it with? And I love the quote here. I've truncated it, but they're attributing all of the qualities of the beer to the Waukesha water that they're brewing it with. William makes a number of improvements as well to their brewing facility. He's got a couple things stacked against him kind of as he helms the company through the end of the 19th century. They're near a railroad line, but they're not on it, which limits their ability to start shipping things. But they can make improvements to their ice house. They bring gas lighting into the brewery. They make some additional improvements to their kilning operations. This Sanborn fire insurance map really gives you an impression of what the full scope of facility looked like. You can see they've got an on-site, a number of on-site ice houses, the dwelling that the family occupied just to the side there, and then actually, again, across the street, that Bethesda Brewery bottling and shipping facilities that were down just across the street. Now, still, this is the Bethesda Brewery. After having been the West Hill Brewery, we're not quite at the better remembered Weber Brewery yet. That really happens with the third generation of the family. In this picture, you have William's children, William and Stephen, Virginia, Marie, Killian, Richard, and then Adelaide and Paul, the youngest two. Part of why I really love this picture, one, the story that goes along with it is that this photograph was taken around the time that the decision was made to name the brewery after the family. So it was kind of a celebratory moment for them that in the third generation now it will be the family's business. But also there's an outtake. Doesn't always happen with historic photography that we see the negative that wasn't used or the photograph that wasn't quite as good. I like to think that the dog is the cause of some of the confusion at the top of the porch there. And Adelaide's just missing from the picture. She didn't make this one, but we have a new character who's in the background of this picture of this one. And it's this woman, Julia Weber. Julia's William's wife, and William passed somewhat unexpectedly of lung disease, and her two eldest sons were prepared to get in the family business, but they weren't quite there yet. And she had been involved with the company up until that point. And by many accounts, it is her presence at the brewery that allows them to be as successful as they are, and that allows then her sons to transition into the leadership roles that they do. In terms of products that are remembered and really what Weber was known for, one of my favorite brands of theirs was the old-fashioned brew. It has got a almost painfully heritage-inspired label, accounting through the process of growing and reaping your grain. You even see a woman sitting at what appears to be a flax spinning wheel, just every step of this agrarian process giving you the Weber Brewing Company old-fashioned beer. Now, Weber, like many breweries, had to figure out what to do during Prohibition, and one of their attempts was to make a new-fashioned brew, a malted beverage that could be sold during the dry spell. So very much trying to fashion off of their flagship brand. Nobody liked it, apparently. They pulled it fairly quickly and actually ended up working with Brook Hill Farm, one of the major dairy operations here in Waukesha County, and incorporated the Waukesha Dairy Company and transitioned their bottling line into a milk bottling line and the milk production line. And not uncommon, where you saw brewers during the dry spell look to see how they could either adapt their existing infrastructure systems or bring new products that they could make in-house onto the line. The Waukesha Dairy Company, after Prohibition was repealed, they end up selling that kind of company off and then resuming their brewing again. Now, Weber was not as a company was perhaps not as successful in Prohibition in getting themselves in a position to resume brewing again. It took them a year after it was repealed. So repeal happens in 1933. It takes them really until 1934 to bring up production again. And that's not necessarily just because they're making a lager beer and it's got to go store away. There was actually a provision that allowed you to make your lager beer, store it so that it would be ready in time for the repeal. They weren't quite there. And in the end, in many ways, fell prey to kind of the transition of generation. They'd made it through 3 generations of family ownership. The 4th generation just wasn't there, waiting to take the reins. And also just kind of natural lifespan. By the early 1940s, Killian, who was William and Julia's son, who had run the company for many years, Killian had passed away. Julia passes away. Stephen is kind of left in the room, holding down the family business. He ends up bringing some investors in at the Christmas party in 1951. They introduce one of the new shareholders, who was otherwise an executive at the Blatz Brewing Company, from our near and dear neighbors in Milwaukee. And it clearly is kind of a first inroad. Some of the breweries in Milwaukee, but also dealers down in Chicago and elsewhere, had been looking at kind of easy companies to start buying up after Prohibition, and Weber certainly fell prey to that. So kind of the lineup of what their brands and brews look like through the years. Left to right, you really see the evolution of the Weber branding from those embossed bottles. Their Superb beer was an early brand label. The American Indian Dipper is introduced. If you are familiar with the city of Waukesha seal, or go Google it in the background, I won't be offended. The American Indian Dipper features prominently on a lot of the iconography from the mid 20th century forward for the city of Waukesha. So again, trading on existing branding. Ultimately, that deep red graphic W becomes the identifiable trademark for Weber beer. They actually win an award for matchbook design in the 1950s for how clean and simple that bright red W is. That it, by some accounts, is the first kind of single letter company branding that is as successful as it is. And ultimately, it transitions to the kind of crowned red W over the Weber name. This photograph coming from 1940, you can see that the building now has Weber Waukesha Brewing across it. And the name change came when the investors really stepped back from the operation. That the branding Weber was still valuable, and so it was retained, but it was now the Weber Waukesha Brewing Company. And 2, you see the trucks lined up there ready to ship out from North Street, as it were. But Weber Waukesha, I should say, by 1958, gets bought out by their neighbors, the Foxhead Brewing Company. And in this case, it may be a age before beauty. Weber's the older one, but Foxhead wins for buildings. This is the Foxhead Brewing Company facility, but it doesn't start life as the Foxhead Brewing Company. You can see plastered along the sides of this building the Waukesha Spring Brewery. Again, we are the city of springs. This company is founded on the idea of capitalizing off of Waukesha's spring water and being just outside of a very crowded Milwaukee brewing market. Now, the idea for this brewery was not a local idea. It was born, as so many grand ideas were, I'm sure, at the Chicago Columbian Exposition in 1892. A group of Chicago liquor and spirit dealers, those who had interest in Chicago brew industry, were looking around for opportunity. They felt very crowded in Chicago. They looked a bit further north. They felt like Milwaukee was very crowded. But at the time, there was a lot of buzz happening at the Columbian Exposition around Waukesha's spring water. Actually, I'll give us a little plug. If you go to the Waukesha County Historic Society website, or we have a YouTube channel, there is a video all about the Great Hygeia Spring War, which was this whole plot to pipe water from Waukesha all the way down to the Columbian Exposition. Does not go very well, so go check out that video. But there very much is this amazing reputation that is the talk of the fair. And you have folks who are looking to invest their money in a brewing enterprise. They're looking at Waukesha, ready to trade on the reputation for the most important ingredient in their beer. The first rumors started appearing in the Waukesha papers by about 1892, 1893. At first, the talk is that they're going to build on the north side of town. That as we look here, you've got the 5 Points North Street, just to reorient, is right up here. So the Weber operation is happening just up there. At first, the rumors are that property up along the Fox River, kind of to the north and east of town, is potentially being optioned to the Chicago investors. That doesn't happen. Instead, as the crow flies, come all the way down here to the number 8, and this triangularly bisected property that's got railroad lines making those cuts. That is the property that the investors end up optioning and developing. And to their credit, it's fairly ingenious. The railroad line coming across here is the Chicago Northwestern. One, it's bringing people into town who are going to see this amazing massive building and wonder what that is making, but also they can ship their beer directly across the country. It is literally steps from their facility to get it onto a rail car. By the 1890s, too, refrigerated rail cars are available. More advanced bottling lines are available to them. This is one of the advertising images for the company, and you can see that railroad is featured right alongside it. If you're familiar with Waukesha today, I'm going to flip back to the map real quick. The street here is Williams Street. You have Maple here, and then Grand. La Station Restaurant and Club 400 are both there along Williams Street. So there is a railroad depot at this intersection that they're building at. As I said, though, a lot of wheeling and dealing just to get them to the property point. The facility, the cornerstone is laid in 1893. The build goes on for 2 years. There was a promise made at first that they were going to employ as many trades as possible from local Waukesha and Milwaukee tradespeople. And yet, as everybody starts putting in their bids, all these Chicago tradespersons keep undercutting the local bids from the masons and the carpenters. So Chicago's well-earned reputation continues. Likely some backroom dealings, ever with Chicago investors. But the facility is completed. Within the first year, though, investors come and go. There are a number of transitions of leadership. Sparing you all of those details, between 1893 and 1899, there are no fewer than 3 different names for this pork company, but by 1899, it finally emerges as the Milwaukee Waukesha Brewing Company. Now, they do operate an office in Milwaukee on Water Street, and so their brokers who are working in lines are really based out of Milwaukee as much as they are out of Waukesha. But one of the other key features to make this a truly Waukesha facility, and some of you may have noticed this in the pictures, this odd looking bottle thing. This is a spring house because there are 2 springs that were on the property that were used in the bottling. So this is a true spring house. You could go inside. There was a running spring in there that you could enjoy an effervescent beverage of water at. And it also is trading on something that I find really fascinating in brewing history in the late 19th century and early 20th, that you should drink beer for your health. It's kind of lost in the resolution in this picture, but there is the word "for" on that bottle side. So it is drink Waukesha mineral spring beer for health. This is good for you. Best branding campaign I've heard. And actually, some of it is rooted in brewers' response to temperance and prohibition. Spirits clearly were bad for you, this being a brewer's perspective. Hard liquor, there's no defense for, but beer, well, beer is just bread, right? You got water, you got yeast, you've got some grains, just slur it all together. The hops are there for flavor. That's no different than putting some caraway or fennel seeds in your bread, right? it's just bread. It's good for you. This campaign I've seen a couple of times from different companies. So you have Foxhead Old Brown Health Beer made with Waukesha spring water. You have Foxhead Health Beers brewed with Waukesha spring water. Time and time and time again. Now, in terms of the Foxhead here, because technically at this point of this picture, it's still the Milwaukee Waukesha Brewing Company. Again, Charles Mangold and August Lindemann end up as the two kind of majority owners, and they take the brewery through the 19 teens and up through the point of Prohibition. Mr. Lindemann passes away in the late 19 teens. Charles Mangold passes away in 1928. And so at the time of Prohibition, the company is really at this crossroads, and it's Emily Lindemann, Charles's daughter, and August's widow, that takes over and sees them through. And for her, instead of transitioning to milk, as Weber had, they've always had this association with spring water. And so they have this known aspect to their company. And so that's the transition that she takes. So Foxhead comes out with a range of sodas and flavored waters, sparkling Waka spring water. That is not my favorite of their Prohibition labels, but it's kind of funny. Sparkling Waka. They also do make a malted tonic that is not meant for home brewing. You should not use it for home brewing, but you can absolutely use it for home brewing. But Emily Lindemann is very connected in the United States Brewers Association. There's a lovely report from one of their meetings in the 1930s, after Prohibition had been repealed, that calls her out as being the only woman in the room of hundreds of brewery presidents and brewery managers from across the country. And this picture here is the celebration of the end of the dry spell, and Mrs. Lindemann is right there in the middle in her lovely fur coat, celebrating along with her brewery manager, August Kirchstein, there. And under her presidency of the brewery, so she's there from 1928 to about 1942, 43. Huge number of improvements. She absolutely hits the ground running. So she's one who gets permission for them to start brewing their lager beer so that it's ready in time for repeal. She's brewing also the 3-2 when it's permissible. They really never give up the ghost on being a brewery. And she also smartly, in the same way that Weber had created the Waukesha Dairy Company as a separate organization, the Springwater Company and the Soda Company was a separate entity in terms of the business. So they had separate incorporations running. But I'd be remiss not to share some of the other classic Foxhead logos. Now, again, that zinc bottle kind of gives it away. This fox has always been associated with the company. It wasn't until 1920, though, that they became the Foxhead Brewing Company. So you see that Foxhead, though, on the mineral water. Foxhead Old Waukesha Ale, that very gothically inspired W, the Gothic text on that W, another classic Foxhead piece of iconography. But again, they're trading on the Spring City. So you also see Spring City beer and a high proof lager beer. Now, for me as a enjoyer of beer in the 21st century, high proof lager sounds not correct. I'm very intrigued by what high proof was, but I digress. But of the many improvements that they make in the first decade after Prohibition, a brand new bottling facility and office that is right along that railroad line. You can see that bottling house carved into the top of that structure. So they can now, with the construction of this building in 1935, 34, 35, they can take the beer straight off the line into crates, into the rail cars, and out across the country. Fox had a market penetration into Chicago, as well as across and into New York. So their beer and their kind of ephemera does show up across the kind of Great Lakes and Northern corridor, in part because of how much they capitalized on the utility of the railroad. They were also very well known, though, for their Rathskeller, or their cellar bar. This picture from 1935, a celebration again, Emily Lindemann right there in the middle. I desperately wish that I had either of those very large novelty bottles in our collections. I've got a couple of folks I know who may either have them privately or know where they live these days. But there are any number of stories, and we have some photographs from various celebrations that were held in that Rathskeller through the 1930s and 40s and 50s. I will say I get the sense sometimes that they were always looking to host a party at Foxhead. This celebration is from the year later, out on their lawn. You see that zinc spring bottle or spring house building there in the background. So in 1936, they launched a new brand, a new beer. And so this was the celebration. Again, you've got Emily there in the middle in her lovely wool coat with that fur stole around it. They actually rented out a train and outfitted it with dignitaries from Milwaukee and Waukesha. They ran the train from Milwaukee back over to Waukesha. If I'm recalling right, there was an ambassador from Hungary on the train. I mean, just these incredible people. And so the brand they were launching was Foxhead 400. Which is perhaps the best remembered in terms of Foxhead's marketing and branding. And 400, the story of that brand gets a little murky. The railroad line itself is one source for that. The Chicago and Northwestern Railroad ran approximately 400 miles from Chicago to the Twin Cities in 400 minutes. And the stations along that route were sometimes, there were 400 stations that they stopped at along that route. You also see bars opening along that route called 400 clubs. There is one in Waukesha, Club 400, that is right across the street from the Foxhead Brewery. Ultimately, that 400 may source back to kind of high society in the Gilded Age. So in the 1890s, that there was this 400 club of well-to-do socialites in New York City that were reported on kind of throughout New York and into the West. And that moniker 400 became a way to indicate a high society kind of enjoyment or location. And so you do see it pop up. I, within the last couple of months, was corresponding with another group out of upstate New York who had come across some Foxhead 400 marketing material and contacted us like, what's going on here? Because we've also got some 400 brand beer from our area, but it's over there. And was there? So it shows up a lot across the country. I also really enjoy that yellow banner that you should demand Foxhead lager beer, along with the other brands that they have. But again, always, you'll see this kind of ubiquitously across these labels, made with Waukesha water. By this point in time, the springs there in Waukesha really ends by the 19 teens for a number of reasons. But for the breweries and for the companies that are trading on the reputation, that's still good branding. So you're no longer coming to Waukesha to take the spring water or to have your healthful relaxation or necessarily seeing Waukesha water in the same way that you did before, but you're certainly still seeing the advertising come through on secondary products. But one of the other major changes for Foxhead that happened in the 1940s was this guy, Headley. Their logo, he gets his name, first of all, by this point in time. He looked a little shaggy, a little scary at various points up to now. So they make him much friendlier, very approachable, very cartoonish. They actually run him for president in 1948 as part of an ad campaign. My understanding is he didn't do well, but some of the headlines got it wrong that year, so that's fair. It wasn't a sure thing for anybody. But Foxhead 400, again, their flagship brand. Headley gets a makeover yet again. And so you see this very stylized Fox then through the 1950s. Foxhead 400 beer, brewed with Waukesha water. It's never going away. And even a kind of advertisements announcing the new label. Trying to give it a little bit more presence. This is the same era where we saw Weber adding the crown to the W. So trying to elevate the brands a bit. Again, by 1958, Foxhead had purchased Weber. Emily Lindemann, again, retires in the early 1940s. So it's really investors and managers running Foxhead. It is not nearly the family story that Weber is, but they are community minded. So this is a bass drum that we have in collection from the Foxhead sponsored, as my father would say, Oompa band, but marching band, community band. Weber similarly sponsored a community band. They both sponsored baseball and softball teams. Foxhead in 1950, in the early 1950s, actually donated to the city an emergency response vehicle. So they were not just employers in their communities, but really were active as corporate support for various activities and clubs and organizations. This picture, though, really summarizes what is happening to these small regional brewers like Foxhead and Weber all across the country, where you see them kind of merging with each other or getting bought out. So in the foreground, you've got the two Foxhead branded trucks, but even in the truck on the right, there are Weber bumper stickers attached to his front, those W's that would have likely been bright red. And then in the background, you see a Weber truck loading up there. So a lot of kind of signs of the times when it comes to Foxhead Brewery and Weber Breweries merger. Again, that happens in 58. 4 years later, in 1962, Foxhead Brewery is bought out and by the Heilman Brewing Company in La Crosse. When Weber was bought out, brewing stopped at the North Street location. When Foxhead is bought out, brewing production ceases in their beautiful building that was there on Grand and Williams. And perhaps most insultingly, the Gambrinus statue was moved. To be fair, he first was moved from Chicago to Waukesha and lived here for a number of years before, but he, to this day, is at Heilman Brewing Company. So far as I understand, is at the Heilman Brewing Company in La Crosse. I think he got a little bit of restoration work a couple years ago. I have not been up there to verify this information myself to know what condition he's in or exactly where he is. I think he looked a little bit better in front of the Foxhead Spring House, just a little bit more good situation there in that beautiful building in the background. But I always end my beer presentations with this lovely sign. It was the cover art on our Facebook event for this here tonight of the billboard that was welcoming you into town. So even though it is Foxhead oriented, just really beautiful artwork and kind of an icon of its own time. I also love that it's sponsored by the Junior Chamber of Commerce. So, you know, young professionals a generation ago doing their part to help support local brewing. So with that, I will cheers everyone here tonight.
Cheers. Great job, Bonnie. I'm applauding. I'm sure there's a mass amount of applauding going on in Facebook live land. Yeah, it's so interesting to see, like you said at the beginning, how these little regional breweries existed in these places, and they all kind of failed kind of at the same time, right? 50s, 60s, 70s, they all just kind of consolidated and went poof. And so I guess my first question to start it off, and I will say this is the Q&A portion. So we'll take a few questions. Absolutely. So put those in the comments. But my first question is, you know, so I live in Milwaukee. You live in Waukesha. Milwaukee is obviously associated with beer so much that it's become like, you know, the baseball team's named the Brewers. Everything
Eponymous,
is Brew City, stuff like that. Is there a general sense of knowledge of this history still in Waukesha?
Of the brewing history?
Yeah.
I would say so, in part because there's still a generation for whom their parents worked for Foxhead or Weber. Foxhead in particular. I will actually call out one of my volunteers who I know is not a huge Facebook user at all, but her dad worked at Foxhead Brewery. And so she's told me stories about the parties in the Rathskeller, and two, the fact that they were, like I said, so community involved, folks who were involved with the bands or with the sports teams. So they really are well remembered. Two, we still have at least some of their structure, their physical presence. So the North Street Brewery, the Weber Brewery, that complex still exists, at least part of it. Some of it got torn down, but some of it's still there and is pretty recognizable to the pictures that I showed. So if anybody wants to brave that one-way street, you can just come down off 94. It'll be fine. And then you loop around and visit the museum when it's safe to do so. But for Foxhead, then most of the Foxhead building came down. It was abandoned after Heinlein brought them. It became a public nuisance. And just demolition by neglect is the term that preservation community uses. Some of it is still there, though. I can't think of the company that's in there now, but if you go down Maple Ave, if I'm remembering right, you can actually see there's a fox head over one of the transoms on the building. So the building, in terms of buildings, I wish we're still there, that one. But the fact that there is still built structure, there is still some knowledge of it. And there's a lot of memorabilia. That you have everything from those embossed bottles all the way through cans in the 1960s. So
the Gambrinus statue got moved to La Crosse. Now Heilemann doesn't own Heilemann anymore. So City Brewing, who owns Rolling Rock, and they have a bunch of stuff all over the place. But I wonder if they are not like, I don't think they're as engaged as Heilemann was over there. So maybe we need to start a campaign to bring the statue back to the other side of the state.
I mean, it's an option.
If it's
of the things, and I kind of overlooked him, but of the things from Foxhead that I would like to see back, it's not him so much as on that spring bottle, there's a fox head that was on top. And I know where that is, and it is planned to come into our collection one day.
Well, that's great.
Yeah. I would take him, but I'd take the fox head that was on the bottle first.
So here's a question. I'm just going to pull up Dave's version of it. This is asked a couple times throughout your presentation: is do the beer recipes exist somewhere? Is anybody recreating them today?
Not that I know of.
Grain, so that would be their mantle to carry as Waukesha's brewery.
Yeah. There may yet be some kind of intellectual knowledge from folks who were there. Like, I'm waiting for the person who worked in the brewery and scribbled it down in their cookbook at home to get donated into a collection somewhere. The closest I've come was a letter from somebody asking about sourcing hops and just kind of verifying hops that were being used as part of the recipe. But even then, today we talk about hop varieties readily, like they're in descriptions on beer, Amarillo hops or Citra hops, right? They're not identified in the same ways at the time. And so that alone, understanding exactly what hop profiles are would be very difficult. Some of the other proportions you could probably get at. I believe we yet have, and I'm sure private collectors do too, the bottle that's unopened. Mm-hmm. The best way in would get somebody to do the testing on that. Mm-hmm. I know UW Milwaukee has an amazing brew science lab. Dr. Bettina Arnold is the head of that. I've talked to her a couple of times, but I've not yet asked if that's a possibility. But that, I think, would be the best way in on what the recipe is. Sure.
So Mario wants to know, I'm guessing he's asking about the Foxhead.
Oh.
What do you know about maybe a range of years even?
I desperately want to say the late 70s or 80s. I thought I saw someone on here who would, Bob Lawrence, I see in here. I feel like Bob would know the answer to this. He leads walking tours in town. But I don't know the year off the top of my head.
Okay. Yeah, but you're right though, that it's like anytime if you ever put a house on the market and don't live in it and everything starts leaking really quick.
Oh, yeah.
You take a big industrial building and then you live in it or work in it, it goes to pieces pretty quick.
And for the brewery, so I mentioned they built that additional kind of bottling line. There were all sorts of tunnels dug to either pipe the beer through the structure, but also steam power. And so those tunnels and things too led to a really quick and rapid decay because you've got opportunity not just for moisture that's going to cause decay, but also varmin coming in or the environment, just plants and things growing through. So it really was a structure that was going to be at high risk anyway for abandonment, and it just was this precipitous decline. That's
unfortunate. It's tough to repurpose those old big buildings for sure. I know.
Yeah.
We here in Milwaukee have the same. That's the story all over the place. So I'm going to pull up this question, but then I'm going to pull up your screen again. So where was that sign?
Where was that sign? I know. I'm blanking. Mario, I am so sorry. Email me at info@wchsm.org. What I want to say is like where Les Paul Highway is today, but I need to look at a map to give you the precise location.
Okay. That sign is awesome.
I love it so much. There's another one that's a little bit earlier than that one that says "Welcome to the County of Cows" or "Cow County, USA" with two ladies in like their Sunday best.
Yeah.
If I could afford to erect billboards, the Cow County and this one.
Sure.
No
Absolutely.
question.
Dave's asking, did the spring water really make a difference in the beer quality?
It probably would have been terrible for brewing. So what made the spring water so attractive is that you have this one I've got better than the others. I'm so sorry. No, so the spring water was in part effervescent because it was under some pressure in the shallow aquifer. And so that alone does not make for great brewing. Like imagine putting bubbly water into your first boil. Like it just also the reason it's got effervescence is that you have other things dissolved in it. You've got salts or other minerals that are dissolved. And so there's not room for the sugars to dissolve in. You'd have to drop those out of you'd have to drop those out and get that precipitated out first and then do your boil. So it actually doesn't make sense to brew with spring water.
Well, don't tell the marketing department.
I know.
So a couple things just to wrap up, unless anybody has any last second questions here. So I don't know if you're familiar with, I'm going to post this one up here, Doug Hoverson, who wrote a book about Wisconsin beer, the whole state, which is incredible if you have a chance to get it. But he just fills in some things about those old recipes being mostly gone. Which is unfortunate.
I tend to answer very disjointedly. That was my thought of like, I've seen people asking for hops, but they're not being identified. Like, so set that to the side and then at best you get the others. That was a much better answer. Thank you. Yeah. I like it when there are ringers. I miss having conversations that are very intellectual about beer while sitting at a bar, because all bar conversations are very intellectual.
I miss having conversations with people in person.
Yeah.
Where you can have a beer at the bar and, All right. So the last thing I'm going to pull up here, that probably something that you need to follow up on, Bonnie, is that says,
I know this person. Yes.
So, let's get that to the lab.
Make it happen.
See what we can do with it. So anyway,
that sounds like a great fundraiser. Yeah, I'll talk to Ben Barbara, who's the curator over at MCHS. See what you guys got unopened.
There's some unopened bottles at the at MCHS too. So I know people drink them and they call it the Iron Gut Challenge. So it can go one of two ways. I just want to let you know that.
I'm not going to endorse that.
Nope.
That sounds like a bad plan.
Yeah. No. All right. So, Bonnie, thank you for spending part of your Thursday night.
Gladly done.
Thanks for collaborating with the Milwaukee County Historical Society. Yeah. Again, if you want to support either the Milwaukee County Historical Society and doing these programs, or the Waukesha County Historical Society and all the great things that Bonnie, who is the executive director, I don't know if they were mentioned that. You were I
was here as a beer researcher tonight. That's fine.
That's okay. Well,
this is not what I actually get to do in my real life.
But if you want to support either of these great organizations, make sure that you just Google them and either become members, which is the easiest way to stay involved in these things, or even donate some money right now. That would be really great during this time. So thank you so much again, Bonnie. Another cheers.
Prost.
And then next week, same time, 7:30. We're gonna try to bring summer as much as we can to you. Kevin Abing, our lead archivist at MCHS, he's gonna be doing a talk about historic baseball in Milwaukee. So nice. I can't wait to see what Kevin has there. So cheers, everybody. Have a great rest of your Thursday. Enjoy your weekend.
I saw somebody ask this.
We're drinking Sheboygan beer. That's not even. Boy, I don't know what to do.
So sorry. I should have Race Grain or Eagle Park or Melms. Or Beloba. Those are all Waukesha breweries.
They're also great.
I apologize. I saw somebody call it out, though.
Well, anywho, everybody have a great night. Thanks for joining us tonight. We'll see you next week. All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks.